Welcome to the Owner's Box, where we dare to think outside the box. My name is David Williams. I'm going to lead you on this journey. I'm here with Don Piero, our sponsor and co-host from the Empower Lab. This podcast is designed to inspire and have great conversation with and about entrepreneurs, to inspire people to be entrepreneurial, and to hopefully have the listener walk away with a golden nugget. In today's episode, I'm going to share my story of entrepreneurial spirit. But before I do that, I'd like to introduce and have Don speak to you a little bit about himself.
Thanks, David. I'm a former CEO that had such a great time and such a good run that I decided to spend the rest of my days helping other CEOs and leadership teams manifest their vision. I work with CEOs and leadership teams and help them create a vision, create a plan around it, and execute on that plan.
Don, you have an amazing story, and it's rich with experiences that I think many people could learn from. And so in a future podcast, we'll definitely unpack your story for our listeners. My story really begins with my father. My father was a serial entrepreneur also. And during my childhood, he was always starting and failing at businesses. I like to joke that my holidays were either really good or really bad, depending on where he was in that business cycle. In the end of his career, he started a wine distribution company, and it too failed. And when it failed, he lost everything. And when I mean everything. Retirement, house, everything. And I remember this portion of my life so crystal clearly. My father and I and my father's attorney, we were descending in the elevator from bankruptcy court. And I noticed that my father's attorney's eyes were starting to well up with tears. And it really struck me. And he says to my father, "Nick, you've lost everything. What are you going to do?" And my father turns to me, looks me right in the eyes and says, "Start over." And it was in that moment that I understood what entrepreneurial spirit is. So a couple of weeks later, my dad and I are out at the La Mirada swap meet selling trinkets out of the back of his leased Jaguar, which, by the way, was repossessed eventually. And down the road from us was a guy scrubbing tennis shoes. And he was saying, "Hey, get your shoes cleaned for $1. And if you like to buy the bottle, you can buy the bottle." And my dad and I looked at that and said, "Heck, we can do that." And that week I had received $400 from my previous year's W-2 income. And I took that $400 and I bought 25 cases of that product, Sport Magic. And the following weekend, my dad and I went down to the Orange County swap meet. The night before, I went to behind a Vaughn's Market because I had worked at Vaughn's and I knew that's where they stored the milk crates. And I grabbed 4 milk crates. So the next morning, my dad and I go out to the Orange County swap meet. I turn the milk crates upside down, one to sit on, and I put another milk crate in front of me to put your foot on. And then we put basically a fold-up table between us. We put all the bottles there. And we said to people, "Hey, come on over here and get your shoes cleaned for free." And that day, my dad and I sold every bottle. And that's how we got started in our first business together.
So, David, when you started out, the way you framed it was that, my dad was a serial entrepreneur also. And that share with us, how did it also happen? How did it happen to be that you got the bug, that the bug got you?
Well, that even stems deeper than my father. My grandfather was a real common guy. He was in the military. He was a milkman. And then he found a product that we know today as Tidy Bowl, like the little Tidy Bowl man in the bowl. And he bought that from the inventor, and he turned around and he hustled it, and he grew it to a little business. And then he sold it to S.C. Rykoff, who later sold it to another conglomerate. And of course, it's a huge brand, and everybody knows the little Tidy Bowl man. But that really started with my grandfather. So I think growing up, watching my grandfather in business, watching my father start businesses, my father once opened a video arcade in the early 80s, maybe late 70s, when video arcades were like the big thing. And, you know, he was making money hand over fist. And then, of course, it crashed as quickly as it got together. But I watched my dad run an arcade business. And as a young person in the 80s, going to an arcade, that was the thing to do. And to be able to go to your own dad's arcade was amazing. The funny thing about it is that when the business crashed, all the video games ended up in my living room because we had nowhere else to put them. And so I was like a current kid today. I was like playing these things constantly. But that's where the bug comes from, is those life experiences.
So you shared a little bit about the start at the swap meet, and I think it would be helpful for the listeners to know where things are now before we talk about the journey. What did this all become?
Yeah, so U.S. Continental, which is the company that my dad and I originally started from the swap meet, is still in business today. We have a president who runs the business for us. We're the largest manufacturer of leather and fabric care in the world. And so we make private label, branded care products for all the great brands around the world.
So let's talk about the journey. You know, what would you say are some key moments in time over the last, 30 plus years, right?
Well, this coming August will be 34 years since my dad and I started this thing. Well, I think the most pivotal moment in my younger career was when my father had a massive heart attack. We're into the business about 5 years. I would say we had a successful carny business. We were doing swap meets all over California. We were doing the LA County Fair and the Sacramento State Fair. And my dad has a horrible heart attack, and he doesn't recover. He survives another 15 years, but the brain damage was so severe he never really gets past the mentality of a 10-year-old. And for me, it's a striking moment. I look back at it and I say to myself, in 1994, I lost my dad, my business partner, and my best friend all in a moment. And the tables got turned very quickly because now I became a father to my father. And so there's just so many experiences that came out of that. The first one was, you know, while I was in business with my dad and we were partners, he was really the man. I mean, he was my father and he was really running the show. And I was, you know, in his tutelage and learning more from him in business than I had, you know, learned at Long Beach State, where I studied finance. And so when my father lost his capacity to run the business, I was terrified. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I made a decision that ended up saving me and saving the business. And that was, I told everyone, our employees, our suppliers, and our customers, I said, my grandmother is sick in Florida, and my dad has had to go down there to take care of her. And it's going to be 3 months until he's back in the business. And then 3 months later, I said, it's not getting better, and it's going to be another 3 months. And I kept doing that until I hit the 1 year mark. And then I said to myself, okay, I'm going to bring the employees in, and we probably had 30 employees at the time, and I'm going to tell them. And everybody was shocked and saddened, but they understood because, well, it had been a year and David was taking care of everything. And then I went to our biggest supplier. I took him to lunch and I said, look, I've got some bad news for you, but I've got some good news. I said, my father had a heart attack. He's not taking care of his mother in Florida, and it ruined, you know, he doesn't have the capacity to run the business anymore. But I've been running the business, and as you can see, our account is current and we're growing. And I'll never forget this. His name was David Smith. He was the CEO of Custom Chemical Formulators at the time. And he said to me, he says, that was a brilliant move, because if you'd come to me a year ago and told me this, we probably would have cut you off and put you on COD and watch what happened. But it's been a year and you've done a good job. So credit to you. Let's stay the course. And he ended up actually becoming a quasi-mentor to me. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us either. But then I started slowly, you know, telling customers and everybody. And while everyone missed my dad in the business because he was a fantastic salesman, a fantastic personality, just the kind of guy that got everybody rolling. Everybody knew and understood that things were okay.
Well, speaking of mentors, I know my experience has been that none of us really truly does it alone. Were you alone from then on, or were there other key people in your life that made a difference and had a role in your success?
I love this question, Don, and I absolutely believe it's so important to be mentoring and to be mentored. And so I've looked for that my entire career. And so it reminds me of one of my mentors who had a huge impact on me. So in my family, we have this crazy uncle who was like, nobody ever really liked because he was so crazy. He was flying in his airplane and he was taking his big boat out on the harbor. But he was a very successful business guy despite his craziness. So I decided a couple of years after my dad's accident or heart attack, I was going to reach out to him. And so I reach out to him and I tell him about where I'm at. And I found out that he's not so crazy. He's actually a brilliant business person. And he became a mentor to me. And I love telling this story. So I send him my financials and I send him my sort of business plan, if you will, if you even call it a business plan back then. And I go up and meet with him and he's reviewing all this stuff with me. And he's just so to the point. And he said, David, you must hire a right-hand man. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right. He tells me this story at the same time. He says, why is it that these two woodcutters in the woods, one woodcutter works 7 days a week, 8-10 hours a day, never takes a day off, never takes any time off, and the other woodcutter works Monday through Friday, takes the weekends off, and he takes 2 vacations a year. Why at the end of the year did they both cut the same amount of wood? And I'm struggling with this. I'm like, this is the riddle of my life. And so I can't figure it out. And he says, the woodcutter who took the weekends off and took vacation time took the time to sharpen his blade. If you don't hire a right-hand person, you're never going to have time to sharpen your blade. So our agreement was to meet quarterly. I fly back down to LA area. I'm doing all my stuff. And then I fly back up to San Francisco to have my next quarterly meeting with him. And so I come out of the San Francisco airport. He pulls up in his big Cadillac. The window rolls down, the electric window. And he says, did you hire a right-hand man? And I said, no, but. And the window starts to roll back up and the door locks. And he drives away. And I'm thinking, oh, shit. So I'm standing there and I'm thinking he's going to go around the horseshoe, come back and pick me up. And he doesn't. I mean, he's gone. He's literally gone. So I go back into the terminal. I fly back to LA. I call him up the next day and I said, I'm almost indignant. I'm like, hey, what happened? He's like, if you're not going to listen to me, I'm not going to let you waste my time. So I can assure you within the next 90 days, I hired a right-hand person.
So that brings up a good point. Oftentimes our mentors do in fact have great ideas and great solutions for us. And yet, even when we do them, it isn't quite as easy as it seems. And where I'm going with this is, over the course of 34 years, how many times have you experienced the right-hand man hire? Starts and stops. How's that gone?
Well, it's obviously very challenging to find a quality right-hand person. And I've had some crash and burns. And one of those comes out of the thought that a business or a person who's running a business should think about hiring what the business needs rather than what they can afford. And early in my career, I was hiring people based on what I thought I could afford, which was never the right individual for the job or for me. And so my practice today is to hire what the business needs and worry about whether or not you can afford the person secondarily. If that's the right person, they will pay for themselves and then some.
So one of the things I experienced and one of the things I use in my coaching today is a concept I call failing forward. Because the truth of the matter is that we learn when we fail as opposed to when we succeed. In fact, I've added to it to fail forward fabulously, the idea being that failing forward means that I learned my lesson and it's fabulous because I don't repeat it. I'm curious, Warren Bennis refers to crucibles in his leadership writing, these times when it seemed like I wasn't going to make it through or the end or whatever. As you think of some of your failing forward fabulously experiences over your time, which events come to mind?
Well, in 33 years, I can tell you it's been no easy ride. Let's not mistake. Entrepreneurial is not the easy choice. Entrepreneurialism is the challenging choice. It's the one where you really put yourself out there. And I've put myself out there many times. I mean, in terms of betting the farm, I've done it a few times. But when I think about some of the times where I've fallen on my face and had to pick myself up, I think about the time where I got myself in financial trouble. I extended myself out too far, and I didn't have the staff or the team around me to really bring the business back to health. And it was a very dark time, and I did question whether or not I was going to be able to stay in business. Debt was at the max. No personal, cash security net. In fact, I used to have envy entrepreneurs who had a personal security net in case the business ever failed. It would be okay. And so I had to look outside to outside resources and outside network. And I think that's why I'm so excited that Empower Lab is a sponsor here, because and I think Don's asking this question for because he knows the answer to this one in terms of experiences. But I went to Don and Empower Lab, and Don was able to pull together a rich grouping of experienced CEOs who gave me some tough love and said, you are in trouble, David. And David, you're a great salesman, but you're not going to sell your way out of this challenge. Here's what we think you need to do. And it wasn't a moment of accountability. I've never needed accountability. What I needed in a dark moment when I was in the trench was somebody or a group to pull me out and show me that there is a path forward, and then to allow me to execute that. And so I think that a Tiger team or a group of outsiders who have only your best interest at heart, who really care to see you do well, can provide some really valuable input. And one of the CEOs in my Tiger team in that dark time said, David, I know you've been in business, 15 or 18 years or whatever, but you're going to need to go back into the plant and do the work yourself for a while. You're going to need to get your hands dirty, and you're going to need to be in the plant all day, every day. And I remember doing that. And I remember how hard that was. I almost cut my finger off doing that. I was there on weekends. I was back to, working really hard and diligent to bring it back. And the turnaround really happened when I made a key hire, which goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I had the Tiger team. I had some very good steps forward. I went back into my business, into the trenches, and then I made some really great hires, and we were able to turn ourselves around.
So I'm thinking of probably more than one of these stories. I remember you shared once about a large packaging contract you got that was like really going to make you. And you got deep into it, and it didn't altogether turn out how you had hoped. Do you remember this story?
They come into the mind when you're working on a deal, and you're like, hey, I've seen this before. I've felt this before. And then you go into those experiences, and you use those experiences to help guide you in the future. So I had sold a big contract packaging project with a major beverage company, headquartered out of Corona. And we were at the time responsible for their $60+ million inventory and all of their repackaging. And, every month we would do an inventory with our customer. And one month the inventory was off, and it was off quite a bit. And the CFO said to me, David, let's not worry about it. Let's see what happens next month. Maybe it'll reconcile. And the next month we were off again, even more. And by the end of the third month, the CFO said, we have a big challenge on our hands. And my customer, which was a publicly held company, hired a third-party investigation company to investigate. And these were like big, burly former FBI guys that were very intimidating. And so what transpired was my warehouse employees had stolen a market value of like $8 million or $10 million. It was a cost of like $1.5 million. And this kind of loss would put me out of business. I mean, if I didn't have the ability to write a check for $1.5 million to pay my customer back, and we didn't have insurance to cover this. I mean, I wasn't even thinking about this kind of insurance back then. Well, I mean, the FBI people were looking at me saying, Williams is responsible. Williams is the leader of that company. And, they were threatening me with all kinds of things. And so, I reached back into my history, and I thought, what would my dad do? And my dad was such a people person. My dad believed in standing or sitting across the table from somebody, looking them in the eye, having a truthful conversation, and then making an agreement. So I went to the CEO of this company. I sat down and I said, I am accountable for this. I was on my watch, and this is my responsibility. I'm going to make you whole. And so I said, look, if we continue our contract for the foreseeable future, I will pay you back in credit so that you guys don't lose a penny. And I mean, the CEO looked at me and said, I respect that and I accept that. And we ended up having a run with them where we made millions of dollars and were able to pay that back and still make a very healthy profit.
Great story. Great story. I know there are others too, even where you've kind of created companies within your company, one of those being Shoe MGK. Share a little bit about that and how that came to be and where it is today.
Well, I am very hopeful that Sean Wilshire, the CEO of Shoe MGK, will do a podcast with us because his story is very rich and full of amazing experiences. But Shoe MGK was a customer, and actually it stems from my dad. Just before my dad got sick, he found this kid, Sean Wilshire, who was probably in his early 20s, and he was hustling stuff, and he brought him in and said, I'm going to turn you into a real entrepreneur. And he created the product with Sean called Shoe Magic, and and then my dad got sick, and so like Sean, I like in the previous story, I didn't tell Sean anything. I said my dad was in Florida, and so we started growing a relationship that really started with my dad, and then. Like many entrepreneurs, and not every road to the golden pot is straight up. Shoe MGK got into some trouble, or the brand got in some trouble, and so I felt like I could turn that around. And one of those ways that I felt I can turn it around was I believed that Sean was a fantastic salesman and a great people person, but from a back end operational standpoint, I don't feel like he had the experience or the team to do that. So I approached Sean with the idea that we would become partners and that he would run the front end of the business and that U.S. Continental and I would run the back end of the business. And that's how we partnered together, and that's how we moved the ball forward. And now Shoe MGK is an incredibly incredible brand, and it's, making a lot of money for U.S. Continental and for Sean, and it's been a great experience.
Nice. Now, it's popular these days sometimes to determine what was your why, and I'm curious your philosophy about the whole concept of why. How did that play into your journey?
Yeah, I know the trend now is to sit down and do strategic planning and do the why, the what, and I know Simon Sinek has really popularized that philosophy. But as I'm sitting here today looking back at the entrepreneur I was back then, and as I talk to entrepreneurs who I hope to inspire, the why is not in your head. I mean, my why was all about getting shit going. And sometimes you just got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make it happen. And the why becomes secondary. I think why is very important once you're more established. I think why is very important when you start to have a lot of employees. But as you're thinking about starting a business, I don't know that you have to start with the why.
Gotcha. So thinking in terms of nuggets, the question I always love to ask is, if you really were to just drill down to any one or two things that were the secret to your success, what bubbles up without giving it too much thought?
The one big one for me, and the one I've spoken about already today, is the idea of hiring what the business needs rather than what you can afford. And I think I see a lot of entrepreneurs make that mistake. and they look at it and say, well, we can only afford this, so let's see what we can get. I'm always advising people. So I'm advising a CEO of a footwear company, and I'm saying to him, you're going to have to, you may have to pay for a CEO more than you're paying yourself. That's okay, because he's going to make you more money than you would otherwise. So hire what the business needs. Entrepreneurialism is not the easy choice, as I've said, but at the same time, it can be an incredibly rewarding experience. And so, I think it's being dedicated to your passion and to your desire to succeed and achieve. Don, our tagline is for those who dare to think outside the box. And entrepreneurialism is all about thinking outside the box. It's about navigating challenges and always finding solutions and having the optimism and the desire to find every solution to every challenge that you're faced with. My passion is really to inspire people to be entrepreneurial. I take a great deal of joy in mentoring and being mentored. And honestly, when I'm talking to an entrepreneur who's getting started or stuck in a jam, I always learn something from it. Like, I always get a takeaway. The entrepreneur I'm working with, or the CEO I'm working with, they hopefully learn something or find a way to move forward, but I always get something out of it too. And so as we start to build out these podcasts and we speak to CEOs and entrepreneurs you've never heard of who have been successful but also had tough roads, we're hopefully going to impart some knowledge and some golden nuggets, as we like to call them, and hopefully we inspire people to be entrepreneurial. My feeling is this is a fantastic time to be an entrepreneur. There's tons of opportunity out there. The world is changing. There's a lot of money out there, and money is cheap right now. So I encourage you to be thinking about that, and I encourage you to tune in. Our next podcast is going to be a gentleman named Sam Longo. I'm so excited about this. In our peer group, we refer to him as the Godfather because he has so much knowledge. But the reason I wanted Sam on this show is he has a philosophy, and that started when he started with his father in their first business, which is, I never wanted a job. And we're going to learn about what that means to him. You can follow us on Instagram at From the Owner's Box and on Twitter at FTOB Podcast for updates and information about upcoming guests and episodes. And with that, we'll see you next time.